Okay, so Tunde wants to write a book. He's got all these characters. He's got Lucan, he's got Imani, he's got Ini, he's got what's that rascal that the second, the right hand man to
Nimrod.
Nimrod, and all that. So he's got all those characters. So what do you now do? Do you sit down with Lucan? We start with Lucan, and say, what kind of person is Lucan going to be? And then you start building Lucan's life, from creating Lucan's life from birth to. Is that how it works?
No.
You take each character, and then define each one, and then see how they crisscross and all that.
So for me,
Take us into.
and this is me. I'm not saying this is the right way to write or the wrong way. This is how I write. For me, it is a case of I start with a core concept. So the core concept that I started with was the seals, being the rivers that broke out of Eden, the 4 rivers, so there are 4 seals, but it started as 1 seal. That's where I started from. Once I had that core concept, I then began to build a story around that concept. When I finished building the story, I began to create the characters that will play the roles that the story created. And then once I build the characters must have a life story, they must have character. So each character will not just be, you're not putting a character in the story just because you want him to play a role. The character is a person, must be a living, thinking person. So I begin to develop the character. And that's how...
And they all fit in. That's almost the same way you build a company, a business.
Exactly.
A football club or whatever.
Yeah.
You have the concepts,
Yeah.
and then every other person fits in.
And each
That's
person has their character.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, who reads this in Nigeria? I know you like talking about, how we fail to sell books,
Yeah.
how people don't buy books, how writers
I'm
or
an
publishers-
apostle of that.
You are. Who is going to read this? How many people are going to read this in Nigeria and enjoy it? And what do you plan to do, to get people to read? Because at the end of the day, no matter how brilliant a book is,
Yeah.
people are not reading. You just wonder, what's all the efforts all about, which is my concern, in Nigeria.
Let me tell you, I've been saying that target, and I've been saying it on TV, so that this is the second time I'm saying it on TV. The target I've set for myself is to sell 1 million copies of this. Now,
Nobody has sold 1 million copies ever in Nigeria. Is that correct?
That's well, not
We
totally.
don't have the statistics.
The only African author whose numbers I have seen is Chinua Achebe. Achebe sold
About 15 million.
11 million at last count.
So 11 million.
And 1 million of that was after he died. Now,
Things fall apart.
Yes, Things Fall Apart. And that's the only book that has gotten to that height. And we know the story around that. But a lot of even the celebrated people, I'm not sure they have sold that many books. The reason being that the incentive that is tied to success as an African writer is not in sales, it's in recognition, awards, prizes, professorships, speaking at conferences. That's what's tied to being a successful African writer. Festival attendance and all of those things, which is not bad. It's okay. But what I keep saying is that we need to refocus on selling books as Africans. And a lot of things are happening that it looks like we writers on this part are not taking advantage of. The last time I published my book, the e-commerce companies didn't have nationwide coverage. So I couldn't use them to sell nationwide in Nigeria. Today they have that. I'm going to take advantage of that. As at that time, there were no distribution companies that had relationships with bookstores across the country. So I had to negotiate with the bookstores one by one because I didn't have a publisher. I published myself. Today, the book is everywhere across the country. As at the last time, Amazon had not fully built out their create space. I'm saying that today, there are more channels to distribute this book. So the work we then need to do is to promote. We should approach it as we're trying to sell a product.
So you are one of those people who believes that our problem in Nigeria is not the reading culture. Rather, it's the distribution problem.
Absolutely. And I've tested it I tested that with my blog. When I published my first book, it didn't sell so well, and people told me, look, Nigerians don't read. That's why books are not selling. So I set out to prove to myself, primarily, and then to prove to those people that, look, Nigerians will read if they can find a way to get their hands on it, and if they can find what you are writing interesting, contemporary enough for them to enjoy. And the basis of that is people watch Nollywood as at that time, you know, and they would go out of their way to get it. It's storytelling. It's the same thing. It's just the medium that is different. So I started blogging. And by the time I stopped blogging, I blogged over a space of 2 years. There had been 2 million hits on the page.
2 million.
2 million. So I asked those people, and then said, you see that people actually read. By the time I was publishing my second book, I didn't have that problem. There were ready readers. I did a launch and it was well attended. We did a tour, it was well attended. We sold very well. With this one, Guardians of the Seal, I believe that even from that time to now, there's been a lot more. So it's not a reading culture. I'm not saying that there might not be some issues around that, but I think it's what we are writing, the availability of what we are writing. An example I give, there's some books I want to read that I cannot find. There's no distribution for those books.
So we've got to be more creative.
Yes.
We've got to, publishers have to do a lot more to get the books. Okay, let's get back to you and Guardians of the Seal. When did all this start for you? Writing, I mean. When did all this start for you? This is your second book. Third novel.
Third book.
Right. So when did all this start for you?
First, I can say my first real writing was a long time ago, maybe 2000. But my first book was Servicia. I have not published it yet. I don't think I'm ready to publish that particular story just yet. And that was, Servicia was 2006. The first book that I published was 2011. Blogging also started 2012 to 2014. In that period, I wrote 7 different stories on the blog. Each one was, I used to post every Monday, and I posted every Monday for 2 years. In that period, I wrote 2 novellas, Yobachi and Burden of Proof. In that period, I published my second book, Golden Sands. And then I stopped blogging. I focused on finishing this, because this took virtue.
Took a lot from you.
And then, and this is out now. So it's been a long journey. Some of the stories published, some unpublished, some given out for free on the blog. But for me, I chose to take this path because, you know, I think that there must be multiple paths available that writers can take to success. And so Achebe in his day beat a certain path, you know, for African writers to follow. And it was tremendously successful. And what has happened is a lot of African writers have decided that if I want to be successful as a writer, I must follow that path. But that's just one path. So you find a kid that stands at the precipice and says, I want to be a writer. And then he starts looking for what path to take. And he sees that single path. And he says, this is not me. But they tell him, if you want to be a writer, you have to take this path. This is the path available. And the guy says, this is not me. So he doesn't want to write any longer. There's nothing wrong with the path, get me. But there are people that are excluded because that's not them. That's not what creativity is. So for me, I chose to beat a different path.